All right, live. 3, 2, 1. So Rashod Bateman's getting surgery on his groin, and I feel like it's a good time to start talking about our rankings with these Dynasty rookies. But first, before we get into our top 5 Dynasty rookie rankings, it's going to be our first show of the preseason. So this is kind of how we're going to do things. Some people are more reactionary than others in Dynasty. Some people are reacting on a daily basis. Some people are taking wait and see approaches. So when we have the injuries that could be sort of long term, we can't sit here and report on every single ding that somebody gets in camp. But if it's something that made us say, sigh of relief, or something that made us nervous because it might be longer than we expected, we'll talk about it here at the beginning of the show before we get into the meat of the show. So the first thing that I'm going to bring up to you is Carson Wentz's foot is trending to open the season as the starter following foot surgery, according to sources. This is Chris Mortensen, ESPN. Carson Wentz could have been missing up to 12 weeks, and now we're seeing actually 4 weeks, which is 1 week sooner than the 5-week minimal timeline. Same with Quentin Nelson looking like he's going to open the season. So what could have been a disaster from the start with the new franchise quarterback in Indianapolis looks like all will be okay. Another was Darren Waller continues to miss training camp practices with an ankle. Very important to say, with an ankle. Before it was being reported, not at all. Nothing. It was being said that he's fine and he's missing practices. Okay, well, that leaves a lot of ambiguity. So Jeremy Fowler, of course, from ESPN, has reported that he is missing time with an ankle. He's being brought along like a star should be brought along. So breathe. Amari Cooper passes his physical Tuesday. He could have missed long-term time, and that would have been a big deal for a wide receiver turning 28. Not to mention that CD Lamb was nipping at his heels and now has surpassed him in Dynasty rankings. Last but not least, Michael Thomas seems to be staying with the team. That was huge. Any Dynasty value that you're going to recoup, maybe something we bring up again later, because Michael Thomas is an interesting case in which you're going to have to do something with him soon, or he's going to be on your roster for the rest of forever. So, Chris, the meat of the show is going to be our Dynasty rookie rankings. We've decided to revisit them because a lot has changed. There's been a lot of nicks that probably shouldn't change most people's rankings, and the only significant one has been Rashod Bateman. He's going to get surgery, and there's even reports that he might be put on IR. Now, IR this year and last year, I believe, can be as short as 3 weeks. So if he was going to miss 2 weeks anyways, and he gets put on IR and has to miss 3, maybe not too big of a deal. But let's go through your rookie rankings and see if anything's changed since the season started.
All right. Can I talk about the other stuff like beforehand though, like real quick?
Yeah.
Well, the only one that really matters for Dynasty, at least at this point, is the Amari Cooper storyline, just for the reasons that you listed, right? Because of his contract, at least the out that the Dallas Cowboys have after this year, his dead cap, if I'm not mistaken, drops from about $28 million down to $6 million after this season. Yep. So the team does have an out, and regardless of what you think about Amari Cooper, they do have a choice to make between if they want to retain him, move on from him, or Michael Gallup next season with CeeDee Lamb, obviously being probably going to wind up being the wide receiver one for that particular team after this season. It seems like at least a good thing for Amari that he's going to be available for the season, because availability is probably going to be his best ability when it comes to the team evaluating what they want to do over the long term. So out of that entire list of stuff, the Darren Waller thing doesn't change how we view him in dynasties. Probably at the very least, like, if not your, not my particular tight end one, but if he's your tight end one, he still sits in that elite echelon of tight ends. Same thing for Michael Thomas, aging wide receiver. Don't know what the QB situation is going to look like for the Saints, like moving forward. He's already like 27 years old. If you want to hold on to him or do something with him or whatever, don't really care. The Carson Wentz thing, we talked about that last week. Mm-hmm. I mean, the foot thing that he's currently going through, if he's there, great. He's your quarterback 2, quarterback 3 on your roster anyway. Not a huge deal. So for all that stuff that's going on right now, doesn't change our values for the most part, other than the Amari Cooper thing. I think his storyline is the one that dynasty managers need to at least watch the most, not just his on-field production, but what the coaches are saying about him, what Jerry Jones is saying about him, because he likes to opine on situations as early and often as possible.
Especially on Hard Knocks, huh?
Yeah, so it's just like throughout the season, I would say dynasty managers really do need to keep their ear to the ground when it comes to how the team is looking toward Amari Cooper, not just for 2021, but for 2022, and beyond. So that'll be a very interesting thing in order to figure out how we should adjust. And Adam and I will continue to monitor any of the storylines coming out of Dallas over the next couple of months, and see if we can get you some of that news as soon as possible, so you can make an informed decision with your rosters for that. But for our dynasty rookie rankings, I think it's important for us to go back and take a look at some of these rankings, because not to say things have drastically changed, but I would say that one of the biggest indicators that we had at the end of the draft was essentially just the draft capital that was assigned to these rookies. As we were walking through the draft, in those, those weeks shortly after the draft. So if that's all we had, now we've got we've had training camp, we've got preseason highlights, we've got OTAs. I mean, look, we've got these data points that are pushing us in either direction. So I do think that having a quick debate over what our rankings are, how they've changed and why they've changed, and how we're trying to assign value to these guys even before they play a real NFL snap, during the actual season, I think it's worth discussing and seeing how well those things kind of play out throughout the season. So again, if you want to make moves now, want to try and move a player before next season, or try and move for a player before the season gets started, it's at least worth having that conversation, because we have had at least some more rookies start to make some highlights over the last couple of months as things have started to heat up towards the NFL season. So at least for my money, Ja'Marr Chase still sits at the number one spot. I mean, Adam, do you have any real, argument or pushback still having Chase as the number one wide receiver?
No, not at all. We'll bring Chase back into it when we get Elijah Moore, because we have some comparisons on how the season has gone for them so far in training camp. But Ja'Marr Chase is still best prospect since Amari Cooper, who we just talked about. And in camp, they talked about some separation issues. Ja'Marr Chase wasn't getting 5-6 yards of separation on a consistent basis anyways. A lot of times when you have those wide receivers a la Des Bryant, who win in ways basically your quarterback trusting you and you proving your quarterback right on a consistent basis by winning every 50-50 ball. Actually, there was no such thing as a 50-50 ball with Des, and I don't think there's going to be much of a 50-50 ball with Chase. It's more like a 70-30 ball when you're throwing the ball to Ja'Marr Chase, especially coming from Joe Burrow. So not concerned with that at all if it makes anyone else concerned. I mean, in other years, Ja'Marr Chase could have been higher in dynasty rankings anyways, especially since everybody's been getting really excited about those rookie running backs. So Najee Harris pushed Ja'Marr Chase even back a little further. If you are having FOMO about Ja'Marr Chase, he hasn't got more expensive, so you can go out. You're going to have to pay up for him regardless. Nobody who drafted Ja'Marr Chase is taking a discount because he doesn't separate. I mean, if they drafted him, they knew what they were drafting in the first place. You had to give up at least the 105 in Superflex. However, he hasn't been lighting the world on fire like Elijah Moore. So I would imagine the price at least has not increased. So if you've got fear of missing out, you still have an opportunity to right your wrongs and try to acquire him prior to the season. 101 of the wide receiver rankings for both of us.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. And now, regardless of where you might have the next few guys ordered, let's see if we at least agree. I'll throw some names out and see if they're in the top, let's say, 2 through 4. Let's see if we both agree on those guys, regardless of order. Elijah Moore in that group for you. All right. Jalen Waddle in that group for you.
Yep.
All right. Devonta Smith in that group for you.
Yep.
Okay. All right, I think we can agree on that. So for the next 4 guys, regardless of where you might have them ranked, you might have Jalen Waddle at the back because you're not really all that enthusiastic about the Miami Dolphins situation. You might have Devonta Smith at the back because you're not sure about what that QB situation is going to look like with Jalen Hurts. Smith, while he returned to practice today, so we're recording this on August 16th. He did return to practice today, but he was limited. So we'll see with the MCL stuff, how that's going to progress throughout the season. But at the very least, he's back and working with the rest of the Eagles squad as of right now. But that's like, but really, we're not changing the value of these guys. They're still, for at least for our part, still up at the top of the rankings, like for wide receivers. So now let's see if we can play some games here at the back end of our top 5. So who would be your number 5 like wide receiver as of right now?
I gotta say Rondale Moore.
Okay. I have no issue. I'm not going to push back on that right now. I mean, my personal preference has been a guy that we'll talk about here in a little bit. I think up until the news that we just got, what was that, towards the back end of last week, it was Rashod Bateman. If you want to argue for Terrace Marshall now entering into that conversation, I'm not going to push back on you. We do know that with the Panthers and the fact that their passing core has typically been, really focused. Their passing tree has been really focused on the wide receiver position, especially last season once they got like Joe Brady and Matt Rule into that coaching staff. We saw just most of the targets being funneled to DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see any sort of progression for guys like Ian Thomas or anybody like that. So it was just wide receivers all day long. So with Terrace Marshall now becoming a larger factor within that offense, and even if we go back to his collegiate production, the fact that one of the primary reasons he wound up dropping in the draft was mostly due to injury, not for his skill set. I do think that he offers at least enough upside to be a part of the conversation. So I'm not 100% sold, but I do think at least it's worth having that debate as we start to move into the season, because things have obviously changed. It's only been a couple of months, and we've only seen just some highlight videos and things scrolling across our timeline, but it's at least trying to understand what these rookies and what these teams are telling us by the way that they're using them, that we should try and challenge our pre-draft or shortly after draft rankings now that we have more data that's available to us.
And when we did these rankings directly after the draft, you're still fresh off of doing all of your prospect evaluation. So all the team situations not quite baked into it. It does come into your initial rankings, but you need time to think about it. So Rashod Bateman was my 3, as a matter of fact. And he doesn't get dropped down out of the top 5 just because of the surgery, though that's not good to be starting your season with a soft tissue injury, given that it's a groin and requiring surgery, not just rest, not just time. Definitely not a plus for somebody who needs to entrench themselves in an offense where they should be the wide receiver 1 immediately. The only thing going for him, I guess, not necessarily going for him, but also Marquise Brown is injured. Sammy Watkins just got dinged up. So there's actually no one healthy there. We can bring in Tylan Wallace into the conversation if we like. But there's not going to be that breakout week 1. Rashod Bateman is the next thing that we really, I hoped for. And an interesting conversation that we had with our buddy Dave Kluge, our coworker at our Football Guys dinner at the wonderful Fantasy Football Expo that we spent the weekend doing. He brought up the Rashod Bateman conversation and how difficult it was, even in a stretch of Marquise Brown being fantastic last year, for him to even crack. I believe he mentioned top 30 with a conversation he had with somebody else in the past, that Marquise Brown, at a fantastic clip for a 5-week run last year, was still not really cracking a top 24. And it's difficult to take Rashod Bateman, assuming that he's going to be at Marquise Brown's best on a consistent basis, which is the assumption I was operating under. Not that Marquise Brown is not a fantastic wide receiver in his own right, but he's never going to be the target hog, wide receiver 1, possession receiver, like how you think of Allen Robinson, is how I was thinking Rashod Bateman was going to have his career play out, with a better quarterback, of course. So it's not so much that I dinged him just because of the groin. I do think he's going to get on the field healthy this year. Now, soft tissue, that's scary. So look for your updates from Gene Bramwell, but they can linger. And you could really, really quickly go from a 3-week injury to not seeing, a scratch season for Rashod Bateman, which would be incredibly, incredibly unfortunate. So that's what drops him from 3 to 6 for me. Terrace Marshall is just outside of that at 7. But it's very good to go back and do this exercise, see what has changed, see if you've fallen victim to the camp hype for Elijah Moore. Maybe go back and do your rookie evaluation again just to make sure that you really want to put him up at wide receiver 2 a lot of people are doing just because Devontae Smith had a small sprain. And then people say, oh, no, Devontae Smith's got a sprain because he's skinny. I can't have him as my wide receiver 2 anymore. So you can't make your rankings based off how many camp hype videos there have been.
No, and I think that really you do need to understand like the talent level that each of the receivers have, how they win on the field, and then what their offensive situation is going to look like. And I do think that the Bateman conversation, I think that's pertinent to the discussion in how we view not just these players as NFL players, but also as like assets on our fantasy team. Because with Bateman, we did know, at least coming into it, that while Bateman as a prospect was one of the like top receivers in the class, just the way that where he excels in the field, being able to beat man press coverage, I mean, work in the like on timing routes, like in routes, curl routes, dig routes, like things like that he could be like the wide receiver 1 essentially on any team if you give enough time to work at it. But the situation that he finds himself in after being drafted by the Ravens, it isn't one that's typically conducive to fantasy. I mean, over the past like couple of seasons, I mean, the Ravens have sat at like 32nd in neutral passing rate over the last 2 seasons, like 42%, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just, even if he does showcase that like elite efficiency as a route runner, what's the target share going to be like? Especially on the Ravens, you would expect that he would need to have something almost like a Diggsian or Hopkinsian like target share in
Even
order
if
for
he
him to get
gets
there.
the 28% that you're talking about, 28% for the Ravens is nothing like 28% for the Bills either. So
No, we're talking like north. It has to be like 30%, like almost Devontae Adams, like DeAndre Hopkins, like yeah, that
be close, right?
right, right.
Devontae Adams had the highest at 35%. I mean, that wasn't in the cards for Rashod Bateman early in his career, but I did feel as though he was going to be an outlier in terms of market share for rookie wide receivers, which is historically low. I think we're going to be surprised at what Jamar Chase's market share ends up being. We were talking about week 1 DFS, for example. I had Jamar Chase in my dummy lineup at 4,800, and we were discussing what could I really realistically expect his market share to be in week 1. Usually climbs historically, as you brought up, probably a 15%. And you're thinking, how did you draft this guy at 5 overall and give him a 15% market share in week 1? Well, you've got T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd there. So it's probably going to be the same conversation we had with Rashod Bateman, but even worse because now we won't see him at least until, well, 2 if he doesn't go to IR, at least week 3 or 4 if he does go to IR. It's going to be tough. And then we're going to have that conversation in week 4. Well, 4 weeks into the season when Jamar Chase's market share has climbed up to 18, 19%, and Rashod Bateman starting at 11 or 12, it's going to be panic mode. I hope nobody's selling, so I'm not advising you to fire sale buy because I don't believe that opportunity is going to present itself. People are going to be so excited, especially this is something we talked about before the show. Rashod Bateman, of a lot of these guys, was one of the only ones that was consistently drafted in the first round. So now Elijah Moore is probably a first-round player. I see Rondell Moore going in the first round now. Even you have Terrace Marshall squeezing to the top of the second. Now Rashod Bateman could be finding himself at 204 if people are still doing their rookie drafts. If people waited until the preseason to see some of those guys, which is interesting and cool if your league does that, you could see Rashod Bateman fall to 204. Now that is where I advise definitely look at your evaluation of Rashod Bateman and try to scoop him, trade up for him, whatever. So anybody out there that's still doing your drafts, cool wrinkle. Lucky for you, Rashod Bateman is out for 3 weeks and you get to take him at like wide receiver 6 or 7 now. So if you're listening to us, you know about the email list. We tell you every week. This show is based off of Joe Bryant's email list. It's put together with Sigmund Bloom, put together by Cecil Lammy. And we take the news that's pertinent to Dynasty, extract it, bring it over to the show, and talk about it. This is our first episode that's quote-unquote in season, even though we don't have a first game yet. And so there's going to be a lot of news that happens on a regular basis where Chris and I are going to share the tone that it probably doesn't matter. But we're still going to have to talk about it because it might matter to your league mates. Every league is different. Every league has those people who are very reactionary. And this is where we talk to you about how to capitalize on that reactionary actions by your league mates. the Darren Waller situation. If that happened in week 2, Darren Waller still wasn't playing. Now, the injury would have had to have presented itself by then because there's different rules once the season starts. So the team would have had to report. But weird things like that where we're not really sure, people do tend to get scared in season. And that's something that we'll bring up to you. So make sure that you go over and subscribe to the email list on footballguys.com. You'll get an email straight to your inbox every day, keep you up to date on all the news that you don't really have time to scroll Twitter every day for. So, Chris, I wanted to elaborate on the Amari Cooper situation a little bit more. So we both hit on it at the beginning, but I wanted to talk about Michael Thomas and Amari, kind of lump them together since they're both going to be 28-year-old wide receivers. They're both going to be probably productive this year, though obviously Amari Cooper's coming off the pup. Michael Thomas still could be out until something like week 5, so it's not a lost season quite for him. And you can parse them individually if you like, but I thought it was a good opportunity to discuss how to manage those 28-year-old guys. Like I brought it up in the past that Michael Thomas, I tried to trade Antonio Brown for Michael Thomas when he was ascending, and Michael Thomas ascended right past him. It was already too late, and now you're doing the exact same thing a few years later. You try to take Michael Thomas and trade him for your Rondell Moores or something like that. You're going to have trouble already.
No, and I think that's fair, but like we were talking about earlier, I think it's really about what sort of value, or understanding like what sort of value they offer, not just your team, but their current NFL teams. And that's those are the situations that we really need to monitor. And I think that's what's going to give us some more clarity on how we should proceed with either of the two. Because if the rumors that we're hearing about Michael Thomas blowing off the team's doctors for a number of weeks to the point where they were trying to get in contact with him and he was ignoring their phone calls and then opting to have the surgery later, and this is how he finds himself in this current situation of missing multiple weeks, like during the regular season. It's just, where are they currently at with Michael Thomas? Like not just at like from a health perspective, but from a, do we still want this player like on our team, like that sort of thing. Like, so that's where we really need to try and understand, like, well, what is the team, like how does the team value these wide receivers? The same thing with Amari Cooper. Even if his ankle is 100% fine, like what's his production going to look like? What's the stability of that ankle injury going to be over the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 17-week season? Is he going to be available during the playoffs if they wind up getting to that point when they really need him? Those are the things that we're going to need to have to pay attention to in order to figure out, well, from a dynasty perspective, should we go ahead and pull the ripcord now and try and move them as soon as possible so that we're not stuck holding the bag as Dallas gets rid of Amari Cooper. Michael Thomas tries to trade. The Saints try and trade like Michael Thomas, like to a separate team. And then we're left trying to figure out, well, what their value is on this new team at 27, 28, 28 years old, like for both of them. And I think that's what's going to make it a little bit more difficult to discern after the fact. You can be proactive as a dynasty manager if you wind up listening for some of those stories, which we'll try and deliver as we learn more. But I think that should be the best way that we can approach them right now, just given what we know.
So as we consider this question, I'm thinking, who is an ascending wide receiver that you could trade Michael Thomas for? Because at this point, all this news adds up. We've discussed it in the past. It's like having a chisel and just nicking away at a statue until it's down to rubble. You don't get to rebuild the statue. You can't glue the rocks back onto the statue. It's the same deal. I mean, even if Michael Thomas, like I brought this up while you're talking so that people could read that Michael Thomas has met with Sean Payton recently. And it seems like the two sides are working to resolve the difference. If I have to give my TMZ approach to it, I think that Michael Thomas was upset that he was even in the game that he got injured. And then he was probably upset that he was being told not to get surgery, I'm assuming, for the Drew Brees run, if we're looking at the tea leaves. And then now all of a sudden it is on Michael Thomas that he didn't get the surgery, which he probably did ignore people because it's Michael Thomas. So if you look into it more, it's not going to get better for Michael Thomas. So bring it full circle. I mean, would you trade Michael Thomas straight up for Rashod Bateman?
Not at this point. No, I don't think so.
You don't think that you would take Bateman for Michael Thomas?
Take Bateman for Michael Thomas, so I'm trading Michael Thomas away and getting Bateman in return. I think that's That's pretty close because regardless of the slow start, like for Bateman, where he winds up in terms of the pecking order in Baltimore, while that pie, like the pie of total targets might be smaller than whatever we think the Saints are going to roll out over the next, like even not just this season, but next season, I still do think that the way that Bateman wins on the field, he could wind up being that wide receiver one for a team that you would want to have. And while Michael Thomas, regardless of if he stays with the Saints or not, like his utility over the next few seasons might wind up like trending downward, whereas Bateman, I can only see him moving upward. Like while his ceiling might be, it's definitely not going to be as high as Michael Thomas's because he's not playing with on a pass happy, high paid offense with Drew Brees. Right. So I do think that while his ceiling might not be as higher, you can at least look for more sustained production, like and on a with a ascending asset versus Michael Thomas. I think it's more like the opposite of that for him.
And here's the crazy thing about the conversation. So if we could rewind and do some things different, say Michael Thomas got the surgery and now we're looking at healthy Michael Thomas, then we're having this conversation like maybe I should be trying to grab Waddle for Michael Thomas or Devontae Smith. Obviously, it was never going to be Jamar Chase. We're 2 years past where that would have been fair value. But you could have been talking about your wide receiver where you 3 or 4 in this class being traded for Michael Thomas. I didn't even waste the time bringing up Elijah Moore, who is my wide receiver for Michael Thomas. That would get laughed at, and that's kind of silly.
Probably,
but it's true. Nobody in their right mind right now would be taking Michael Thomas for Elijah Moore, maybe even Rondale Moore, who I've moved up to 5 just ahead of Bateman. Not going to have, and Rondale Moore has plenty of holes. If you love film, you love Rondale Moore. Even if you love analytics, you kind of love Rondale Moore. You just don't love that he's 5'7".
Oh yeah.
So there's still some holes, and you're still not considering that. So I think Bateman is fantastic value if you could take your Michael Thomas and say, look, I know there's a lot going on with Michael Thomas, but he's still that elite slant boy, and there's some things going on with Rashod Bateman too. Maybe that gets done, but we're real close. We're like one camp highlight from Rashod Bateman after his injury. So I guess it's not camp, one practice highlight from Rashod Bateman after injury to where you can't even trade Michael Thomas for him either. So if you've been listening to the show and you're a big fan, that means you're a big fan of fantasy football. That means you take this very seriously. So if you want to test your grit, head over to FFPC's Player Championship. $350 buy-in and play against a lot of other fantasy players out there who take it very seriously as well. You can really test how your analysis has worked this offseason, how much you've absorbed. Make sure you're listening to the right people. If you've been listening to footballguys.com, there's going to be a lot of people who were not listening to footballguys.com. So if you've trusted the content, you've enjoyed what you've heard, take it over there to FFPC, find the Football Guys Players Championship, and test your luck this year. Last thing I want to talk about, I knew we had to slide more Elijah Moore, and that's the content everybody wants. If we could block out 10 minutes of Elijah Moore every week, I think everybody would be happy. So I have to bring it in elsewhere. I have to figure out how to sneak it in. So I did want to give the Denzel Mims update that Denzel Mims ate bad salmon during spring, triggering a bout of food poisoning that caused him to lose 20 pounds, according to Rich Cimini of ESPN. The only reason I bring that up is because we're all looking for a reason to explain the Denzel Mims usage away. It makes no sense that he was running with the 3 at times, now running with the 2. I believe he is past Keelan Cole. I really, really hope he is past Keelan Cole on the depth chart, or else I'm really not understanding what's happening in life. But with Denzel Mims coming out and saying, look, I lost 20 pounds. It took me weeks to get it back on. Maybe he's got a slow start. Maybe all is not lost for Denzel Mims on your Dynasty roster. I really do feel like the only resolution here is a trade. But you can't – what can you do with Denzel Mims on your Dynasty roster, Chris?
Oh, the best thing you can do right now is hold. Who else on that squad is going to be able to run some of the routes that I think are going to be necessary for a guy like Zach Wilson? Because I know that we like the idea of having a Shanahan, 49ers like type offense where you've got your Ayuk, Deebo Samuel clones like running these crossers and having like multiple option routes for a semi-mobile quarterback in Zach Wilson, with Michael Carter coming out of the backfield, catching these swing passes and taking to the house, or whomever, whatever the case may be. But even in Shanahan's offense, we were still hyped for Kendrick Bourne, Richie James.
Right.
Those guys still had
Jalen Hurd.
roles. Yeah, Jalen Hurd. I mean, those guys still had roles like within that offense.
Right.
I mean, for their worth, I mean, Bourne was still like showing up in red zone drills and things like that. I mean, in catching like multiple touchdowns, like in even in like a single games. It's just those guys still have roles. So while I completely understand that they made Corey Davis, they gave him this massive contract. Elijah Moore is the new hotness. Jameson Crowder is like the old, boring slot wide receiver that's probably going to still wind up putting up.
I still draft him.
Yeah, not Julian Edelman numbers, but he's still going to be a reliable portion, like a reliable asset, like on your team. Mims still has a role that is and should be not necessarily coveted, but it is valuable to that particular team. And so while I get like when he came out of college, wasn't the best separator, not the best route runner, but he has improved parts of his game that I still think make him at least a valuable asset to that particular team. Because I don't think that he can, with his speed, I mean, Elijah Moore, like, while good route technician, not as fast as Denzel Mims. Same thing with Corey Davis. I mean, obviously the case for Jameson Crowder. Nobody can run as fast as him. What, 4.38, something like that, like coming out of college?
Similar, sure.
Right. So Mims like obviously has like that skill set that cannot be replicated by anyone else on the team. So at least for my money, I still think that Mims is still a guy that you would keep on your roster. Now, if somebody wants to come sniffing around, offer you a decent deal for him, okay, fine. Have those negotiations. But I'm at least, I don't know, for some reason, I'm cautiously optimistic that he can still wind up creating. He already has a foothold on that offense with what he does and what he's capable of doing. And really, if the only knock against him is not necessarily being the perfect fit for a Shanahan offense, that is still something that he can learn, especially over this season, because it's not like they're getting rid of him anytime soon. And then if he winds up catching on, I mean, that is a guy that's an archetype of player that you would want to be a part of that system.
I love the term cautiously optimistic. I'll put myself in the same category. Actually, I'll go a step further and recommend acquiring him at cost. Currently, there's no way that it could get worse for him in any case. For one, he's at the point of not playing, right? So you're trying to acquire a player that's not playing. Should not be too terribly difficult. But I will say, I think we all fell victim to he just doesn't fit narrative. I'm sure that I've said, he just doesn't fit. And the more I've been thinking about it since that came out, and the more I've heard every single person I listen to say, yep, it just doesn't fit. I think, does he really just not fit? There has to be more. So when you have to hang on to lost 20 pounds from food poisoning, it's like, do I buy that either? But I have to buy something, right? There has to be some reason. It can't just be that Denzel Mims kicked Robert Saleh's dog or made him mad in some way. There has to be a reason. So if the reason has to be that he got food poisoning, lost 20 pounds, and he was battling his way back at the same time coinciding with training camp, there could be a light at the end of the tunnel for the Jets for him. Because if you look at it, he's just significantly better than Keelan Cole. And I'm a fan of Keelan Cole. The Jets are clearly a fan of Keelan Cole because they came out and said, I was trying to get him for the past 2 years. If you tried to get Keelan Cole, you could have got Keelan Cole. There was no one who was saying, nah, I'd rather keep him for anything significant. Right. So I don't believe that Keelan Cole is the roster clogger that's going to ruin Denzel Mims' career. And if he is, that's fine. Mims will go somewhere else and be productive. I mean, we were talking about Rashod Bateman. I don't know if it was during or before the show when we were discussing Rashod Bateman. I was talking about contested catchability, but Denzel Mims has that my ball attitude. And you were dead on the money, exactly 4.38. So kudos to you for getting that in that trivia. But he's fast and has that my ball mentality. People want that. It works in every offense, especially a rookie quarterback in Zach Wilson, who wants to believe that he's Patrick Mahomes, as Matt Waldman likes to say. So if you want to pretend to be Patrick Mahomes, chuck it up to Tyreek Hill. Now they don't have a Tyreek Hill, but Denzel Mims is as close as you're going to get on that roster. So get him on the field. let Zach Wilson chuck it up to Denzel Mims every once in a while. And I think the point you were getting at is, who cares if he's the 3 or the 4? He can still have a role in the field. Elijah Moore can play slot, which we've talked about back and forth. I feel like Jamison Crowder probably has that role so solidified that you want Elijah Moore playing outside. But I think you're more optimistic that Elijah Moore can move around. Well, if Elijah Moore can move around, slide Denzel Mims onto the field, and now you're talking about, a snap share that is at least significant. It's non-zero, because right now it's 0. So if you get Elijah Moore in the slot like you think may happen, then who gets on the field? Denzel Mims. So worth acquiring there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the way that we should look at it. And while I understand why some of he didn't fit with the offense narratives were coming out at the time, because
Sure.
he didn't necessarily fit from a primary wide receiver standpoint. Because if you're trying to map the 49ers offense to what the Jets are trying to do, then sure, it makes sense that you would say, all right, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Corey Davis, Elijah Moore. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
there you go. But those third guys, those ancillary guys, the Kendrick Bournes, the Richie James, or whatever, we don't necessarily care about them because we just see so much production and yards after catch and all those other, like the sexy pieces of the 49ers offense. That's those two guys, and that's what Corey Davis and Elijah Moore could be. But those other guys, that's where Mims kind of slides into like that category. But again, if he doesn't have that same, I guess, appeal from a draft pedigree standpoint, and if he also hasn't been able to show, at least on the field, that he can be more than just a contested catch, like down the field, just chuck it up and we'll see if he can win type of guy, then it is hard to see how he can fit inside that offense. So I get it at the time, but again, he's only a second-year player. He was put in one of the worst situations, at least like as compared to most of his classmates, like coming out from last season. He's not completely dead. He's not like Andy Isabella. That's for daggone sure. He has much better, like at least chance at still remaining with his team like after this season. So it's just, I think that from a cautiously optimistic standpoint, Mims is, if you've already drafted him, I mean, what's wrong with holding on to him for at least this year, see how well he fits with the team, and then figuring out what to do afterwards.
And you certainly can't trade him, that's for sure.
Yep.
So if you've checked out the site recently, which I highly suggest you do, we've got the new site at footballguys.com. It's fantastic. Oh my goodness, it's so clean. You've got the podcast and the shows right out front, so it's really not hard for you to get here, which is where I want you to be, clicking the notification bell so you know when we go live. But if you're on your phone, sometimes it's not so clean to be looking at the site. So check out the Football Guys mobile app, available on iOS and Android, and you can get your Football Guys content via phone, so you don't have to be doing your whole scrolling around your mobile website there. So check out the Football Guys mobile app on iOS and Android. We have one more thing to discuss this week, and I promised Chris that I would tell you we can't do this every week. Okay, every time that somebody does something insane in the preseason, this will not be able to be the show for it. But Rhamondre Stevenson rushed 10 times for 127 yards, 2 touchdowns in his first preseason game Thursday, August 12th, last week. And so I wanted to bring it up because you have an ambiguous backfield. You have a player that we were excited about in the 3rd round. I was excited about him in the 3rd round, late 3rd round sometimes, parts of the offseason 4th round perhaps for Rhamondre Stevenson. And these are the backfields that, well, they're kind of the backfields you want to target. You want to target if you're looking for Rhamondre Stevenson. You may not necessarily want to target the backfields if you're targeting Damian Harris, because Damian Harris is the person who may not be the benefactor, while Rhamondre Stevenson is the benefactor, because we're targeting the ambiguity of the backfield. James White will always be the James White. We've always just tried to figure out who's going to do the rest. It was LeGarrette Blount for a time, etc. Well, we were planning on it being Damian Harris this year, and in best ball, I've been taking a ton of Damian Harris because I'm hedging that Mac Jones will get, a decent amount of starts, and hoping that Cam Newton's not a battering ram like he said he was not going to be. So you really never know what's going to happen in that backfield. So if there's somebody in Rhamondre Stevenson who can really show the juice in the preseason, you may be able to show the juice for your dynasty rosters.
I don't want to pour cold water on this, So I'll at least provide as much context as I possibly can. Like when I going back through and looking at that preseason game, let's start with just the facts of the game. 10 carries, 127 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's the stats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One of those carries went for 91 yards and a touchdown. So
breakaway speed is what I heard.
So I'm just saying, if you roll off with the news blurb, not to say you're wrong in doing this, but if you just look at his stats from the preseason game holistically, 10 for 127 translates to 12.7 yards per carry, which again is a descriptive stat, but then of course that's what people take it as being. But
oh yeah,
if you have one carry go for 91 yards, then you go from 9 carries for 36 yards, which is what he did for pretty much the rest of the game, which is 4 yards per carry. You go from 4 yards per carry to 12 yards per carry, or 12.7 yards per carry, all in one shot. So that's math for you. So
you didn't want to pour the cold water, is what you said.
Yeah, but
I think I misheard you.
But that's what I started off with the facts, but you gave the context. The breakaway speed that he showed, like during that particular run, is noteworthy. He came out of college with one of for a running back perspective on the slower end of 40 times. It was like a 4.6, 4.7, if I'm not mistaken. So we didn't look at Rhamondre Stevenson as a guy that would have that sort of home run breakaway speed. So that's good. We just had a report from the running backs coach from the Patriots, not just 2 or 3 weeks ago, saying when he was asked directly what Rhamondre Stevenson, what he needed to work on, the guy literally said everything.
He's a rookie. Of course he has to work on everything.
I don't know. I don't know, but they didn't say Elijah Moore had to work on everything. They're not saying Travis Etienne has to work on everything. No, and it's not Bill Belichick that said that. Well, not all the coaches are like Bill Belichick. Not all of them are like that.
Mostly. You have
They're not all
out
like
there
that.
Wearing 50-something. So
the quarterback's coach didn't say Mac Jones has to work on everything.
Well, they didn't ask him. He probably would. Bill Belichick probably tells them what they need to say, as a matter of fact.
I don't know about all that. But to me, it's just
maybe he had a bad day of practice. I don't know, but I don't think I didn't take that as Rhamondre Stevenson is bad at football when he said that.
No, and I'm not saying that at all. But out of all of the camp highlights, I haven't seen or heard any other even neutral reports about Rhamondre Stevenson. So that's where we need to take that stuff into context. It's like we have the one data point, while subjective, from a coach saying that he needed to work on everything, to this other data point on the opposite end of the spectrum of us actually physically seeing him while he might have been running against our second or third team defense or whatever.
Sure.
I don't care. But at least we're seeing his physical ability, which doesn't match some of the stats that we were kind of pinning on him throughout the draft process. So I would say, regardless, if 2 people tell a story, the way that you can almost evaluate the story is you've got your side, my side, and the truth. There's always 3 sides to every story. And we're actually seeing this being played out in real time. We've got this draft profile, we've got what we've seen, and now where does the truth lie? So probably somewhere in the middle. We've seen that because the other score that he had was on a short yardage touchdown. That's what the Patriots need. So adding more context to this. So it's just these, I think what we saw are the things that we needed to see from Stevenson to say, yes, he could work as a fantasy football asset on my team. That's what we needed to see from him. Was he going out and catching a ton of passes or anything like that, or working outside of the bounds of what we expected of him? No. But can he do the things? Can he do the things that we would want him to do as a running back in the NFL, or even a running back on our fantasy team? Yes, he can do those things, or at least from a very small sample size, he can do those things. So that's why I'm open to the position of where he's being currently valued, or where he was valued in rookie drafts. I don't know why you would still be doing a rookie draft at this point in the offseason, but if you are still doing that, yes, value him appropriately. If you were thinking about, you want to throw out some sort of offer in order to do something like that before last weekend, yes, go ahead and do that. But even if you drafted him thinking, and then hearing those reports and all that, and thinking that you already drafted a bust onto your squad, you can at least hold tight knowing that there is something that you can hang your hat on to show that Stevenson does have some value and should have some value to that team, considering that, James White ain't getting any younger. Sony Michel's contract should be running out, so he's probably not going to be a part of the team. If not next season, then probably the season afterwards, or cut or traded or something like that. So we can see depth chart moves being made such that he winds up just ascending into that role right behind Damian Harris.
Yep, Sony's almost definitely gone next year. So it's going to be Rhamondre Stevenson on his rookie deal, and it's going to be Damian Harris. So in your dynasty, you can just say, well, at worst, Rhamondre Stevenson is coming in 2 years behind Damian Harris is, and you've got the Patriots who like to churn their roster at running back. So you probably will get an opportunity to see Rhamondre Stevenson. Fast forward to 2 years, and you're going to listen to me saying the same thing about Rhamondre Stevenson that I'm saying about Damian Harris this year. And I like Damian Harris, but I will say I don't believe that Damian Harris or Sony Michel break off that 91-yard run. And you hit the nail on the head with his 40 time was 4.64, I believe. So I also, before that game, wouldn't have told you that he would have broke off that run. So while, yes, one play sample, I did not believe that that was in his toolkit. So it was nice to see breakaway speed paired with a short yardage situation. That's how you get your 2 touchdowns. I love the context and the math because, yes, 91 yards is quite a bit. He would have tied Terrell Pryor. I believe Terrell Pryor had the 91-yard touchdown for a quarterback. Look at that pool. So you've got Rhamondre Stevenson as somebody to watch, not somebody that we can talk about every week, somebody who had a pretty monster opening. And you know what? I think that after that camp hype in some shallow leagues, he could have got dropped, to be quite honest with you, because the negativity I saw surrounding it on Twitter seemed as though it was like, okay, you know what? I'm out on Rhamondre Stevenson. He was already a late third, early fourth in some cases. Maybe he got dropped. So I don't know. Go check or see if it's still reasonably cheap to acquire him. But do you have anything else for today, Chris?
No, I think that's it. Trying not to get too swayed by the NFL preseason stuff that's going on right now. Try and see if you can stick to your priors as much as possible. And if you find yourself swaying, try and use that as some sort of sanity check before you wind up making some sort of wild trade for whomever the new hotness is going to be as the preseason continues on.
And that's why we wanted to do that top 5 today. And just to kind of pair it with Rashod Bateman, who we both had in our top 5, it's like, at some point, you should probably go back and say, why did I have these players ranked this way? And why do I have them changed now? Am I still drafting them this way? Is it fair that I've moved Elijah Moore up so much just because he's been so awesome in camp? Those are the questions you should be asking yourself. So please click that notification bell so you can see when not only us, but everybody on the Football Guys staff goes live on YouTube. Please like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Thank you all for coming out. We'll catch y'all next time.
Peace.